I have drawn the borders of empires. That is my trade, and among my people it is a sacred one because we have always believed, for as long as the easel have charted the dark, that a line on a map is the truest kind of fact there is. A star is just a star until someone draws a line around it and registers the claim. Then it becomes territory, becomes possession, becomes a thing that belongs. We are cartographers, survey claimants. We go ahead of the empires into the unmapped dark, and we draw the lines that turn the dark into property, and the lines we draw are honored across the whole reach, because the easel charts are the one thing every empire agrees to trust. A border is only real if an easel drew it. That is how the galaxy was divided. By us. By lines. So I thought I understood lines better than anyone alive. I had drawn the boundaries of the 4 great empires. I had settled border disputes that had killed millions. I had stood in the dark between 2 war fleets and drawn the line that stopped the war, because both sides trusted the line more than they trusted each other. I knew what a line was, what it meant, what it could do. And then humanity drew a line, and I spent the rest of my life discovering that I had never understood lines at all, that my whole people, in 10,000 years of charting, had understood only the smallest and crudest thing a line could be. Let me tell you what a line meant before humanity. It will make the difference clear. A line meant ownership. That was the whole of it. When an empire wanted territory, it sent for the easel, and we surveyed the region, and we drew the boundary, and we registered the claim. And from that moment, the space inside the line belonged to the empire, and the space outside belonged to someone else, and the line itself was the thing both sides defended with their fleets. A border was a wall you could not see, and on either side of it sat the guns that made the wall real, because a line is only honored as long as someone is willing to kill to defend it. That was the truth beneath all our charts, the truth the easel did not like to speak but every cartographer knew. Our beautiful registered lines were only as real as the violence waiting behind them. We drew the lines. The empire's guns made them true. And the galaxy was a vast quilt of owned spaces, each one a claim backed by a fleet, each border a place where 2 violences met and agreed, for now not to cross. The 4 great empires divided nearly the whole charted reach between them, the Severith Dominion, the Kaal Ascendancy, the Vorm Collective, the Threll Imperium. 4 empires, 4 colors on the great chart, 4 vast owned spaces pressing against one another along borders I myself had drawn, and in the small spaces between them, the unclaimed scraps, the contested margins, lived the lesser peoples, the 100 small species who had no empire, who survived in the gaps, who were forever being absorbed or displaced or crushed as the 4 great empires shifted their borders and swallowed the unclaimed dark a little more each century. That was the galaxy. 4 predators and 100 prey, and a quilt of lines that everyone honored exactly as much as the guns behind them required, and not 1 degree more. Humanity was one of the small peoples. I want to be clear about that, because the title says Earth drew a line, and you might imagine a great power flexing its strength, and it was nothing like that. Humanity held a modest cluster of worlds in a contested margin between the Severith Dominion and the Kaal Ascendancy, and they held it precariously, the way all the small peoples held everything, because the 2 great empires on either side of them were always pressing, always surveying, always inching their borders inward, and everyone knew. I knew. I had charted that region. I had drawn the lines that hemmed humanity in. Everyone knew that humanity's cluster would eventually be swallowed. The way the small peoples were always swallowed, when one empire or the other decided the margin was worth taking. And then humanity sent for me. To draw a line. This was not unusual in itself. Small peoples sometimes hired the easel to register their modest claims, a pathetic gesture really, because a small people's registered line means nothing without guns behind it, and the small peoples had no guns that mattered. I had drawn 100 such lines for 100 small peoples, and watched 100 such lines be erased when an empire decided to cross them, because a line without a fleet is just a suggestion, and the empires did not honor suggestions. So when humanity sent for me, I expected the usual, a small people wanting the dignity of a registered claim before they were inevitably swallowed, a line drawn to be crossed. I went because the easel go where we are hired, and because I was curious, in a tired professional way, what doomed little boundary this latest doomed little people wanted me to draw. The human who met me was a cartographer's opposite, in a sense, not a claimant but something they called a steward, a word my translators struggled with because it meant a keeper of a thing you do not own. Her name was Imani Salrenner, and she did not behave like the representatives of small peoples usually behaved. The small peoples, when they hired me, were always desperate, always trying to make their claim look bigger, more defensible, more worth respecting, padding their borders, reaching for every scrap, the doomed grasping of the about to be swallowed. Imani Salrenner did the opposite. She wanted me to draw a line, yes, but the line she wanted me to draw was not around humanity's worlds, or not only around them. She showed me the region on my own charts, the human cluster, and around it the contested margin, the unclaimed scraps where a dozen of the smallest peoples eked out their existence in the gaps between the great empires. And she traced with one finger a vast line far larger than humanity's actual holdings, a line that enclosed not just the human worlds but the whole margin, all the contested scraps, all the small peoples, a great region of mostly empty dark between the Severith Dominion and the Khal Ascendancy. And she said, draw the line here, register this as the boundary, make it an easel chart honored across the reach. I told her she could not claim that space. It was absurd. Humanity could not even defend its own modest cluster, let alone a region 10 times larger that included a dozen other peoples and vast tracts of contested dark. To register such a claim would be meaningless. Worse than meaningless, it would be provocation. It would invite both great empires to crush the presumptuous small people that had dared to claim a margin both of them wanted. I told her, professionally, kindly, that I could draw the line if she insisted and paid, but that it would be the most quickly erased line I had ever drawn, that the empires would cross it within a season, that a small people claiming a great margin was simply painting a target on itself. And Imani Salrenner looked at me, and she said the thing that began my education, the thing that took me the rest of my life to understand, the thing that is the whole meaning of the title. She said, we're not claiming it, that's the part you're not hearing. I don't want you to register this as human territory. I want you to register it as nobody's territory. A line around a space that no empire can own, including us, especially us. Draw the line and register it not as humanity's border, but as a border around a thing we're protecting. The small peoples inside it, the unclaimed dark, all of it, not ours, theirs, free. She paused. We're not drawing a line to say this is mine. We're drawing a line to say this belongs to no one, and no one crosses it to take what's inside. That's a different kind of line than you've ever drawn, isn't it, cartographer? I can see it on your face. You've drawn 10,000 lines that meant mine. You've never once drawn a line that meant safe. I had not. She was right. In 10,000 years of easel charting, no one had ever asked me to draw a line that meant safe, because the concept did not exist in our cartography, because a line had only ever meant ownership, and ownership had only ever meant the guns behind it, and a line around a space that belonged to no one was, by everything I knew, not a line at all. It was nothing. It was a wish drawn on a chart. It had no fleet behind it, no claim behind it, nothing behind it but the strange human insistence that a space could be protected without being possessed. I almost refused. I almost told her it could not be done, that a line with no owner and no guns was a contradiction, a thing that would mean nothing to anyone and would be crossed without a thought. But I am an easel, and we go where we are hired and draw what we are paid to draw, and she paid, and so I drew the line. The strangest line of my career. A vast boundary around the contested margin between two empires, registered not as a claim but as, I had to invent the term, there was no easel word for it, registered as a sanctuary. A space belonging to no one, enclosing a dozen small peoples and the unclaimed dark, with humanity not as its owner but as its steward, its keeper, the small people who had drawn a line not to take but to protect. I registered it in the great chart, honored across the reach, and I left, certain I had just drawn the most pointless line of my long career, a line that would be erased within the season, a small people's beautiful doomed wish that the great empires would cross without even noticing it was there. The Seventh Dominion crossed it first. Of course they did. 3 months after I registered the line, a Seventh survey fleet pushed into the margin, the way the Seventh always pushed into margins, to begin the slow, inevitable absorption of the small peoples inside. They crossed the human line without a thought because it was a small people's line, a line with no guns, a suggestion. And I followed the reports, the way a cartographer follows the fate of his lines, expecting to record another erasure, another small people's wish crushed under an empire's indifference. That is not what happened. What happened is the thing the title means. What happened is the thing I had not understood, that no easel had understood, about what humanity had actually done when it asked me to draw a line that meant safe. The Seventh crossed the line, and nothing happened to them, not at first, not from humanity, because humanity had no fleet to punish them and everyone knew it. But the Seventh had not crossed a small people's border. They had crossed, the great chart now said in letters honored across the whole reach, the one sanctuary in the galaxy, the one registered space that belonged to no one, that protected the small and the unclaimed, that humanity had drawn not to own but to keep free. And the other 3 empires saw it. The Kaal Ascendancy, the Vorm Collective, the Threll Imperium. They saw the Seventh cross the line, and they did not see a small people being swallowed, the ordinary unremarkable thing that happened every season. They saw something else, something humanity had made visible by the simple act of drawing the line in a new way. They saw the Seventh Dominion become the empire that crossed the only line in the galaxy that everyone secretly needed. I am getting ahead of myself, and I have to slow down, because the thing humanity understood is subtle, and I did not understand it for years, and I want you to understand it faster than I did. So I will leave you here. At the moment the Seventh crossed the line, and I sat at my chart certain I was about to record another erasure, and instead began to record the strangest thing I have ever charted, the slow dawning realization, across the whole reach, that humanity had not drawn a line around a territory at all. They had drawn a line around an idea. And an idea, it turns out, is the one kind of border that cannot be crossed by a fleet, because there is nothing on the other side for the fleet to conquer, only the watching eyes of everyone who now knows exactly what kind of empire you are. I went back to Amani Solrenner after the Seventh crossed. I had to. The cartographer in me could not leave a line half understood, and this line I did not understand at all. I had drawn it, registered it, watched it crossed, and yet something was happening in the reach that my whole science could not explain. So I returned to the human steward, and I asked her to explain to me slowly, as you would explain to a child, what she had actually done, because I had drawn the line and I did not understand my own work. She was kind about it. That is a thing I remember, that she did not mock my confusion, though she had every right to, since I was the great easel cartographer who had just confessed he did not understand his own chart. She sat with me, and she explained, and the explanation is the thing I most want to give you, because it is the secret of the whole story, the thing humanity understood that 10,000 years of easel charting never had. She said, tell me what makes a line real, in your science, what makes the empires honor an easel border? And I gave her the answer every cartographer knows, the shameful truth beneath our beautiful charts. I said, the guns. A line is honored as long as someone is willing to kill to defend it. Our charts are trusted because the empires agree to trust them, but the agreement rests on force, Cross a defended line and you face the fleet behind it. The line is real because the violence is real. Remove the violence and the line is nothing, a suggestion, a wish. Right, she said. That's the only kind of line your galaxy has ever known. A line that's real because of what happens to you when you cross it, you get shot. So when we came to you and asked for a line, you assumed we meant that kind. A line we defend with guns. And since we don't have guns that matter, you assumed our line was worthless, a wish. You were right that it was worthless as that kind of line, but we didn't draw that kind. She leaned forward. We drew a line that's real because of what happens to you when you cross it, but the thing that happens isn't that we shoot you. It's that everyone else sees what you are. We didn't put guns behind our line. We put witnesses behind it. The whole reach. Every species, every empire, every small people who's ever been swallowed. They're all watching the line now, because we made it the one line that isn't about ownership. The one line that protects instead of claims. And a line like that, once everyone's watching it, can't be crossed without the crosser paying a price no fleet can protect them from. I asked her what price. I did not yet understand. The price of being known, she said. Think about your 4 great empires. They've spent 10,000 years swallowing the small peoples, and they've gotten away with it because each swallowing was just business. A margin absorbed, a border moved, the ordinary churn of empire that no one could point to as a crime, because there was no line that made it a crime. Crossing a small people's border was nothing, because the border meant mine, and the small people couldn't hold it, so taking it was just taking, natural, unremarkable, but we drew a line that means safe. A line that says everything inside this is protected, free, belonging to no one. And now, when an empire crosses it, they're not absorbing a margin anymore. They're violating a sanctuary. They're the empire that broke the one protected space in the galaxy. And every other empire, every small people, every potential ally and trading partner and neutral party in the whole reach is watching them do it, and learning, permanently, that this is an empire that will cross the line that protects the helpless, that it cannot be trusted near anything it might want, that it is, nakedly in front of everyone, a predator that respects nothing. I began slowly to feel the shape of it, and that costs them. It costs them everything that isn't taken by force, she said, which is most of what holds a galaxy together. Trade depends on trust. Alliances depend on trust. The willingness of small peoples to deal with you instead of fleeing from you. The willingness of other empires to make agreements with you instead of arming against you. The 1,000 quiet cooperations that a great power needs and can't conquer. All of it depends on being seen as a power that honors its limits. We didn't draw a line the empires can't cross with their fleets. Of course they can cross it with their fleets. They have all the fleets and we have none. We drew a line that, when they cross it, makes them visibly into the thing every other power in the galaxy most fears and least wants to deal with. The Severith can take the margin. They have the guns. But the moment they take it, they've shown the whole reach that they're the empire that takes sanctuaries, and the whole reach will price that into every dealing with the Severith forever. The line doesn't stop their fleet. It stops their future. And no fleet can conquer a future. I sat with that for a long time. The cartographer in me, the 10,000-year science of mine and yours, turning the new thing over and over. Because she had described a kind of border my people had never charted, a line whose power came not from the violence behind it but from the witnesses around it, a line that protected not by threatening the crosser but by exposing them, a line that turned crossing from an act of conquest into an act of self-revelation. The empires had always been able to cross any line if they were willing to pay the price in blood. Humanity had drawn a line whose price was not paid in blood but in trust, and trust was the one currency the empires could not seize by force, could not stockpile, could not defend with fleets, could only earn and only lose, and once lost over a thing as visible as a violated sanctuary, could not buy back at any price. Why you? I asked her finally. Why did humanity do this? The other small peoples have been swallowed for 10,000 years, and none of them ever thought to draw a line like this. Why did you? And she gave me the answer that turned the whole thing, for me, from a clever trick into something I have honored ever since. "'Cause we were about to be swallowed too," she said simply. "We're a small people, cartographer. We held a margin between two empires that both wanted it, and we did the math, and we knew we couldn't hold our worlds by force. We'd lose the way the small peoples always lose, so we had a choice. We could spend everything we had trying to defend our own little border, our own mine, and lose anyway the way everyone always loses, or we could do something else." She paused. "We could draw a bigger line. A line that didn't protect just us, but all of us. Every small people in the margin, all the unclaimed dark, the whole vulnerable space the empires were circling. We could turn our doomed little mine into an undyingly defensible ours. Not ours humanity, ours everyone. Because here's the thing your science never learned. A small people defending its own territory is just prey the empires are entitled to take. But a small people protecting everyone's sanctuary is something the empires can't touch without indicting themselves in front of the whole galaxy. We couldn't make ourselves unswallowable by getting stronger. So we made ourselves unswallowable by getting bigger than ourselves, by drawing a line so generous, so clearly not about our own gain, that crossing it would cost the crosser more than the prize was worth. We didn't protect Earth. We protected everyone. And in protecting everyone, we became the one thing an empire can't afford to be seen destroying. That is the line humanity drew. Not a wall around what was theirs, a shield around what was everyone's, and they put themselves inside it not as its owner but as its keeper, so that to attack humanity, an empire would have to attack the sanctuary, and to attack the sanctuary, an empire would have to become, in front of the whole watching reach, the predator that broke the one safe place in the galaxy. Humanity had made its own survival inseparable from the survival of everyone the empires preyed upon. You could not eat humanity without eating the sanctuary, and you could not eat the sanctuary without the whole galaxy watching you reveal yourself as the thing no one would ever trust again. The Severith had crossed the line, and in Part 2 I will tell you what it cost them, how the crossing that should have been a routine absorption became, instead, the slow public unmaking of one of the four great empires, watched by a reach that humanity had quietly turned into a jury. And I will tell you what the other three empires did when they understood what the line was, and the terrible choice it put before each of them, and how I, an easel cartographer who had drawn 10,000 lines that meant mine, came to spend the rest of my life drawing the only kind of line that had ever actually held, the kind that means safe, the kind humanity taught a galaxy of predators to fear more than any fleet. Because it was the one line that could not be crossed without the crosser, losing the only thing a fleet can never take or defend. The trust of everyone watching. The Severith Dominion did not understand what it had done for almost a year. And watching them not understand, it was like watching a creature walk into deep water without knowing it cannot swim. They had crossed the line. They had begun the absorption of the margin exactly as they had absorbed 100 margins before, and by every measure their own analysts used, it was going well. The small peoples inside the sanctuary could not resist. Humanity had no fleet. The Severith survey ships planted their claim beacons and their administrators moved in, and the slow machinery of imperial absorption ground forward. And the Severith court, I am told, was pleased, because they had taken a rich margin at no military cost, and what could be better than that? What was happening everywhere else, they did not see, because it was not happening in any place a fleet could go. It was happening in the minds of everyone watching, and the Severith had never learned to chart that territory, because no empire had, because before humanity there had been nothing worth charting there. I charted it. That became my work in those years, the strangest survey of my career, the mapping of a thing that had no coordinates. I followed the consequences of the crossing across the whole reach, and I will give them to you in order, because the order is how an empire dies when it dies this new way, the way humanity invented, the death by witness. First, the small peoples changed how they dealt with the Sevireth. Not dramatically, small peoples cannot afford drama. But there are 1,000 small daily cooperations a great empire depends on from the lesser species around it: trade, passage, information, the quiet willingness to deal rather than flee. And after the crossing, those cooperations began everywhere to cool. A small people that had traded with the Sevireth for generations found reasons to trade elsewhere. A passage that had always been granted was now, regretfully, complicated. Nothing you could point to. Nothing that broke any agreement. Just the slow universal withdrawal of the benefit of the doubt, because every small people in the Reach had watched the Sevireth cross the sanctuary line, and every small people had thought the same thought. That could have been us inside that line, and they crossed it anyway, so they will cross any line, so we cannot trust them near anything we love. The Sevireth had taught the small peoples, in one public act, exactly what they were, and the small peoples, who had no fleets but had each other and had memory, and had the simple power to choose who they dealt with, priced that lesson into everything. Second, the other three empires changed how they dealt with the Sevireth, and this was where the death became visible. Because the three great empires, the Kaul, the Vorm, the Threll, were rivals of the Sevireth, and rivals are always looking for advantage, and humanity had just handed them one. The Sevireth had revealed themselves as the empire that crosses sanctuary lines, and the other three empires, who were no less predatory than the Sevireth, who would have crossed the line themselves given different circumstances, now had every incentive to be loudly, publicly, profitably horrified by the Sevireth crossing. They condemned it, they made speeches. They positioned themselves, in front of the whole Reach, as the empires that would never cross the sanctuary line, not because they were better, but because condemning the Sevireth cost them nothing and gained them everything, gained them the trust the Sevireth was losing, gained them the small people's cooperation that was draining away from the Sevireth, gained them the high ground in every future dealing. Humanity's line had turned the Sevireth's rivals into the line's fiercest defenders, because defending the line was now the most profitable position in the galaxy. Do you see the trap? Do you see how complete it was? Humanity had drawn a line with no guns behind it, and within a year the line had three great empires defending it, not out of virtue, but out of pure self-interest, because humanity had arranged the incentives so that defending the sanctuary was the profitable move, and crossing it was the ruinous one. The Sevireth had crossed it, and now the Sevireth's own rivals were the line's army, an army humanity had recruited without asking, without paying, simply by making the line the kind of line that whoever crossed it would be punished by everyone who didn't. The empires defended humanity's sanctuary against the Sevireth, because doing so destroyed the Sevireth, and destroying a rival is what empires do. Humanity had turned the predators against each other, using their own predation as the weapon. The Sevireth, a year in, finally understood. I know the moment they understood, because it is in the records, the moment their court realized that the rich margin they had absorbed at no military cost was, in fact, costing them more than any war they had ever fought. Their trade was collapsing as the small peoples withdrew. Their alliances were fraying as the other empires used the crossing against them. Their standing in the whole Reach was in free fall, and there was no fleet they could send to fix it, because the thing they were losing was not territory, it was trust, and you cannot send a fleet to recapture trust. They had taken the margin and lost the galaxy, and the margin was not worth the galaxy, and there was no way to give the margin back that would undo the lesson everyone had already learned about what the Sevireth were. That is the thing humanity understood that I find most terrible and most beautiful. The crossing could not be undone. The Sevireth could withdraw from the margin, and eventually they did. They pulled their beacons and their administrators out. They tried to put the sanctuary back the way it had been. They tried to uncross the line. It did not help, because the thing that had ruined them was never the occupation of the margin. It was the revelation of their character, and you cannot unreveal a thing. Everyone had seen the Severith cross the line. Withdrawing only proved they had crossed it and then found the price too high, which taught the Reach a second lesson on top of the first, that the Severith were not only the empire that crosses sanctuaries, but also the empire that does so foolishly, that doesn't understand consequences, that has to be taught restraint by its own ruin. The withdrawal made it worse. There was no move that made it better. Humanity had built a trap with no exit, and the genius of it was that the trap was made entirely of other people's eyes, and you cannot fight your way out of being seen. I went to a Manny Saul Renner again during the Severith withdrawal because I wanted to understand the thing that puzzled me most. I said, humanity did this. Humanity drew the line that is destroying the Severith. And yet the Severith cannot even retaliate against humanity for it, because to attack humanity is to attack the sanctuary, which would only deepen their ruin. Humanity has destroyed a great empire and made itself unattackable in the same stroke. But I asked her, is that not its own kind of conquest? Have you not simply found a new way to make war, a way that uses witnesses instead of weapons? Is humanity not now the most dangerous power in the Reach, having discovered how to destroy empires without firing a shot? And she gave me the answer that is the true heart of this story, the answer that separates what humanity did from mere cleverness, the answer I have built the rest of my life around. She said no, and the difference is the whole point, so listen carefully. We could have used this as a weapon. You're right that we could. Once you understand that trust is the thing empires can't defend, you can weaponize it. You can draw sanctuary lines everywhere, bait empires into crossing them, destroy them one by one with the witness strap, and become the secret master of the whole Reach without ever building a fleet. We thought about it. I want to be honest with you, cartographer, because you deserve honesty. There were humans who argued for exactly that. Use the line as a weapon. Become the power that rules through trust the way the empires rule through fear. She paused. We decided not to. And the deciding is the only thing that makes the line hold. I did not understand, and she explained. And the explanation is the thing I want to leave you with at the end of this part. The line only works because it's real, she said. Because the sanctuary is actually a sanctuary, actually protecting the small peoples, actually free, actually not ours. The moment we use it as a weapon, the moment we draw sanctuary lines for our own advantage instead of for the protection they claim, the whole thing collapses, because then we're just another empire claiming territory, and everyone can see it, and the witnesses stop being on our side. The line's power comes entirely from its honesty. It protects because it genuinely protects. The Severith fell not because we were clever, but because they crossed a line that was genuinely, verifiably, a shield around the helpless, and everyone could see that it was, which is why everyone turned against the crosser. If we ever made it a trick, a bait, a weapon, the seeing would turn against us instead. So we can't. We're bound by our own line. We made a thing whose power depends on our never abusing it, which means we built our own restraint into the foundation of our own strength. That's the part the empires will never copy, and it's why they'll never be able to do what we did. They can't draw a sanctuary line, because a sanctuary line only works if you actually mean it, and an empire that actually meant it wouldn't be an empire anymore. That is the secret. That is why no empire dared cross the line, in the end, not because humanity punished crossers, but because humanity had built a thing so honest that crossing it punished you automatically, through the eyes of everyone who could see that the thing you crossed was genuinely good. And humanity held the line not by force but by never once abusing it, by keeping the sanctuary a true sanctuary, by refusing to turn the most powerful weapon ever invented into a weapon at all. Because the moment they did, it would have stopped working, and they understood that, and their restraint was not weakness but the literal source of their power. In Part 3, I will tell you what the galaxy became, after the Severith fell and the other empires understood that the age of swallowing the small peoples was over. not because anyone could stop them by force, but because the witnesses were watching now, and humanity had taught the small peoples and the empires alike that there was a kind of line that could not be crossed. I will tell you how the reach changed, and what became of the four great empires, and what became of humanity, who had drawn one line and thereby ended 10,000 years of a galaxy where the strong took whatever they wanted from the weak. And I will tell you what became of me, the easel cartographer who had drawn 10,000 lines that meant mine, and who spent the last years of his life learning, from a small people who should have been swallowed, how to draw the only kind of line that ever truly held. The kind you cannot defend with guns. The kind you can only defend by deserving. The Seventh Dominion did not fall in the way empires usually fall. There was no final battle, no burning capital, no fleet shattered in the dark. The Seventh simply diminished, year by year, as the trust drained out of them and could not be refilled, their trade routes withering, their alliances dissolving, the small peoples turning away, the other empires circling not with fleets but with the patient confidence of rivals who know that a wounded power will keep wounding itself. Within a generation, the Seventh were no longer one of the four great empires. They were a cautionary tale, a thing parents of a dozen species told their young. Do not be like the Seventh, who crossed the line, who took the margin and lost the galaxy, who taught the whole reach what they were and could never unteach it. The Dominion still exists, in a reduced and careful form, having learned the lesson at last. But it learned it too late to be what it was, and the lesson it learned is the lesson humanity taught the entire reach with a single line. There are some things that cost you more to take than you could ever gain by having them. The other three empires understood this, watching the Seventh fall, and the understanding changed them in a way that 10,000 years of warfare never had. They did not become good. I want to be honest, the way Imani was always honest with me. The Khal and the Vorm and the Threll were predators still in their hearts, and a predator does not become a herbivore because it watched another predator choke. But they became careful. Specifically, they became careful about the sanctuary line, and then, slowly, about lines in general, because humanity had taught them a thing that could not be untaught. That the witnesses were watching now, that character was visible, that an empire's reputation was a kind of territory it could lose without a shot being fired, and that the small peoples it had spent 10,000 years swallowing had, all along, possessed a weapon the empires had never noticed, the simple collective power to decide who they would trust. The age of swallowing ended, not all at once, not perfectly, but it ended. The four great empires stopped expanding into the margins, because expanding into the margins now meant crossing sanctuary lines, and crossing sanctuary lines now meant the slow death of trust, and no empire wanted to be the next Seventh. And the small peoples, who had survived 10,000 years in the gaps as prey, discovered that they were not prey anymore, not because they had grown strong, but because humanity had shown them that they had been strong all along, collectively, in a way none of them had ever thought to use, the strength of being the eyes that judge, the witnesses whose verdict no fleet can overturn. And here is the thing that surprised me most, the thing I did not foresee even after I understood everything else. The small peoples began to draw their own lines. I drew many of them. That became the work of my last years, and it was the only work of my long life that I am truly proud of. Small peoples came to me, not just humanity now, but the dozen peoples of the original sanctuary, and then peoples beyond it, all across the reach, and they asked me to draw sanctuary lines of their own. Lines around the vulnerable, lines around the unclaimed dark, lines that meant safe instead of mine. And I drew them, and they held, every one, because the small peoples had learned the secret humanity taught. That a line drawn honestly around a thing genuinely worth protecting becomes a line that the witnesses defend, and the witnesses are everyone, and everyone is stronger than any fleet. The galaxy filled with such lines. Slowly over my last decades, the great chart changed. The four colors of the four empires no longer expanding, no longer swallowing, and between them and around them a growing lacework of sanctuary lines. A new kind of border the easel had never charted before humanity taught us how. Lines that protected rather than possessed. Lines held not by guns but by the judgment of a watching reach. The galaxy did not become peaceful. There were still rivalries, still grievances, still the old hungers. But the hungers had a limit now, a limit the empires had never had before, and the limit was the line. The honest line, the deserved line, the line you could not cross without becoming, in front of everyone, the thing no one would trust. I asked Imani Salrenner, near the end of both our lives, whether humanity had known it would go this far, whether they had drawn that first line meaning to change the whole galaxy, or whether they had only meant to save themselves, and the change had been an accident. She was very old by then, as I was, and she thought about it for a long while, the way the humans always thought about the hard questions, slowly, honestly, without reaching for a comfortable answer. And then she said, "We meant to save ourselves, that's the truth. We were a small people about to be swallowed, and we were looking for any way to survive, and we found this one. We didn't set out to end 10,000 years of empire. We set out to not die." She paused. But here's the thing we did understand, even at the start, even when it was just about survival. We understood that the only way to save ourselves was to save everyone, that a line that protected only us would have been just another mine, just another thing to be taken, and it would have been taken. The only untakeable line was the line that protected everyone, because only that line had all the witnesses behind it. So we couldn't save ourselves selfishly. The mechanism wouldn't allow it. To survive, we had to become genuinely worth protecting. We had to actually be the thing we claimed to be, the keepers of a real sanctuary, or the whole thing would have collapsed. Our survival was welded to our goodness. We made it so we literally could not save ourselves without saving everyone, could not protect ourselves without protecting the helpless, could not be strong without being honest. And I think her old human face did the thing I had learned to recognize as hope after all our years. I think that's the only kind of strength worth having. The kind you can't use selfishly even if you want to. The kind that only works if you deserve it. We didn't end the empires because we were good, cartographer. We ended them because we found the one form of power that punishes you the instant you stop being good. And then we were smart enough, and lucky enough, to hold on to it without ever letting go. That is the line humanity drew among the stars. Not a wall, not a weapon. A shield around the helpless that doubled as the only untakeable form of strength. A thing whose power came entirely from its honesty. A line that no empire dared cross, not because crossing it brought down a human fleet, but because crossing it brought down the trust of everyone watching. And trust, it turns out, is the one territory no empire can conquer and no fleet can defend and no force in the galaxy can seize. It can only be earned and only be kept and only be lost. And once you understand that, you understand the whole of why the strong feared a line drawn by the weak. I am the last of the cartographers who remember the galaxy before the line. I have drawn 10,000 borders that meant mine, and in my last years I drew 100 that meant safe. And I can tell you, from the far end of a long life spent making the truest kind of fact there is, that the safe lines were the only real borders I ever drew. The mine lines were always lies in the end, lies backed by guns, true only as long as the guns lasted, erased the moment a stronger gun arrived. The safe lines were the only ones that held, because they were the only ones that did not depend on being the strongest. They depended on being the most deserving. And deserving, unlike strength, does not run out, cannot be outspent, is not erased by a larger fleet, because it lives in the eyes of everyone watching, and there is no weapon in the galaxy that can blind them all. Earth drew a line among the stars. A small people, about to be swallowed, who could not win by force, and so found the one kind of victory that force could not touch. They drew a line around everyone they could not save by strength, and made saving everyone the only way to save themselves, and built their own goodness into the foundation of their own survival so deeply that they could never betray the one without losing the other. And no empire dared cross it, not because Earth would punish them, but because Earth had made the line into a mirror, and no empire could bear what the mirror showed when they stepped across. I have spent my life learning what a line is. Here is the whole of what I learned, at the end, from a small people who should have been swallowed and instead changed the galaxy. A line that says, "This is mine," is only as strong as your ability to defend it, and someday someone stronger comes. A line that says, "This is safe," is as strong as the world's willingness to believe you meant it. And if you truly meant it, if you built it honest and kept it honest and never once used it for yourself, then it is the strongest thing there is, stronger than any empire, stronger than any fleet, the one border in all the dark that the strong cannot cross. Because the only line no empire dares cross is the one they cannot cross without showing the whole galaxy exactly what they are. Earth drew that line, and the galaxy has never been the same. And I, who drew 10,000 lies and 100 truths, am glad beyond saying that I lived long enough to learn the difference.